now. Hi folks, we're just giving a few moments here at the top for Zoom to let folks in before we get started with tonight's event. If you are already in tonight's webinar with us, you can open up your chat window and find some information about how to purchase tonight's featured book. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Chelsea from Greenlight and we're excited to welcome you to our online event series Squawkin Sports, hosted by Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. For this installment, they'll be chatting with Kent Babb about his new book, Across the River, Life, Death, and Football in an American City. So you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to our hosts, Patrick and David, and tonight's featured author, Kent, for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make this space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the author and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Across the River, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to be able to offer actual shopping in our bookstore locations, noon to 7 p.m. every day, and you can purchase Kent's book and many others on site. Or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Your series hosts for Squawkin Sports are Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. Patrick has written for many large publications you've heard of and even more small ones that no longer exist. He's a founding member of the Billings, Montana to Brooklyn sports writing pipeline. David was the editor at Deadspin and is now a co-founder and co-owner at Defector.com. His writing has appeared in The New Republic, The New Yorker, Food and Wine, and The Baffler. They'll be speaking with featured author Kent Babb. He is a reporter for The Washington Post and author of the acclaimed Not a Game, The Incredible Rise and Unthinkable Fall of Allen Iverson. His writing examines the intersection of sports and culture, and 3 of his stories appeared in the Best American Sports Writing. The Associated Press sports editors have 3 times honored his features as the nation's best, and Not a Game was shortlisted for the PEN ESPN Award for Literary Sports Writing. His new book, Across the River, is a necessary investigation into the serious realities of young athletes in struggling neighborhoods, as well as a rich and unflinching portrait of a coach, his players, and the West Bank, a community where it's difficult but not impossible to rise above the chaos, discover purpose, and find a way out. Best-selling author Jeff Pearlman calls the book masterful, an equal parts heartbreaking and life-affirming look at a city, a school, and a football team, whose players and coaches spend as much time fighting for survival as they do grit triumph. Kent is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he'll be talking with Patrick and David and with all of you. Kent, please take it away.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for having me. I'll set this up. This is from chapter 1, which is called Carmen. It's kind of an introduction to some of the people that we'll get to know. Edna Karr High School on the West Bank of New Orleans has, they always go away each summer for training camp. Usually it's to Thibodaux, Louisiana, and the campus of Nichols State University. It's usually 3 or 4 days. It's extremely grueling. And there's this thing called Pride Panel, which features 14 team leaders, usually who are selected not just because of their play on the field, but because of their character off the field. They form a U in the chairs, and in this case, they get started with the meeting about midnight. I stayed up till about 5:30 a.m. 3 consecutive nights with the Pride Panel. And this is a scene where Destin Hill, who is known as Fat, he's the star wide receiver. He's since signed to play at Florida State. He's getting into some trouble because he doesn't really know when to keep his mouth shut, and his position coach has stripped him of his honorary number 2 jersey, which is a great honor. And so this is kind of an introduction to just how honest and in some cases sort of harsh the coaches are as they condition these young people for confrontation. During Fat's absence, Pride Panel moves on. Players are called on, more confrontations ensue, answers are offered. A wide receiver promises his position group will be more focused tomorrow. How y'all gonna do that? Joe asks. Joe is a linebacker. He's sort of the protagonist of the story. A defensive back mumbles through a coach's question about body language. Speak up, Joe instructs. Several players fumble through responses about their top priority for training camp. Fuck, Joe interjects. I just need everybody to be together. Then behind them, a door opens. A few players see Fat marching in wearing the 2, and when they laugh, Joe tells them to shut up. You really doing this shit? Nick asks. Nick is the top assistant coach. Fat keeps walking back to his seat. On his way, he parades in front of Omari, his position coach, who reaches out and grabs a fistful of jersey. Take it off, he tells Fat. The young man refuses. You didn't give me the jersey, O, he says. Fat tries to step forward, but Omari blocks him. He grabs the jersey with his other hand. Take the jersey off, Fat, Omari says. Take it off, bro. There's only one person who can order the jersey's removal, and that's the same person who assigned it months ago. That's Brice Brown, the head coach of Carr. Fat just stands there, and Omari, still strong from his college football days, adjusts his grip on the neck of the jersey. Nick stands up, ready for what seems inevitable. The other coaches push their chairs back, making space. Why are you doing all that? Fat says. I'm not about to fight you, coach. Take the jersey off, Omari repeats. His voice is louder. Take the fucking jersey off. Take the fucking jersey off. Omari jerks hard on the neck, slinging Fat forward. The armchairs squeak as they're pushed across the tile. Omari keeps tugging on the jersey, trying to pry it off the kid, and both lose their footing. Omari falls back into his chair, and Fat tumbles into his lap and blurts out something unexpected. With tears in his eyes, it's all he can muster. I love you, coach, he says. That's enough, O, Coach Brown finally says. Take the jersey off, give it here. Fat does, tossing it at Omari's feet. He retreats to his chair and tries to avoid crying. Omari slides deep into his seat with embarrassment. Even Brown knows he let this go too far. Nobody speaks for a long time, and it's clear in this moment this isn't yet a team. It's a cluster of strangers trying to find their footing and their voices. Brown asks if anyone is willing to share what they're feeling. A coach says he can feel his anger issues flaring up. Another points to the book of Proverbs and is teaching that loving a child means acts of tough, even harsh discipline. Another asks if it's okay to step outside and get some fresh air. Anybody else? Brown asks, but there's no takers. Listen, I done been here a long ass time. I done seen some crazy shit, but that was some crazy shit. He takes a breath before continuing. Y'all stuck, he says. Stuck physically, stuck emotionally. Everybody pushing and pulling. Everybody got their own story. Everybody got their own struggle and shit like that. But for y'all got to embrace the struggle. Like sometimes you got to fight yourself in order to overcome yourself. Some faces stare intensely toward the coach. Others are glazed over. It's past 3 a.m. and players are scheduled to be on the field in 5 hours. You got to recognize your weaknesses and your shortcomings, Brown says, and you got to fight. and you've got to battle that shit every day. If a motherfucker call you an I guy, you better accept that shit and fight that shit every day so you can become a we guy. He scans the room, locking on any eyes looking back at him. Fight yourself so you can overcome it, Brown says. If you choose to walk away, you choose to give up. And y'all like to spill shit over to the next day because you don't want that confrontation. Your perception and reality is two different things. You don't want that struggle. You just want the success. You just want the glamour. You don't want the struggle. You don't want the pain. You don't want the blood. You ain't want none of that shit. Pat's looking at the floor with his bottom lip quivering. Omari's hand is on his chin as if his mind is replaying the choices made over the last hour. Nick sits on the arm of a chair, staring at nothing. Joe, though, is looking at Brown as if the coach is speaking directly to him. Some of y'all want a handout, Brown says, but I got news for you. Ain't nothing in this world free. Ain't no handouts.
We are not a room raider. That's not part of our thing, but that is you've won that is the best setup we've had. I mean, like it looks organized.
Sports writer.
John Wertheim was in his closet, basically.
Yeah, that was for a very well-credentialed guy. His whole setup seemed like it was designed by MC Escher. I had a very difficult time figuring out where in his home he was sitting. Great to talk to, but like every time I was looking at him, I was like, "So what? Like your desk is in a closet, and the camera was set up at the far end of it,
presumably for audio reasons."
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I'm at a beach house with my family, and the one concession I've made is that I have angled my chair such that there's no longer visible dirty laundry over my shoulder. That's just a bag. So thank you for picking us both up on this one. Well, Patrick's is always intentional. Mine is never good, but it's seldom as bad as it is right now.
I just need to buy a light, but we'll move on from that. I want to start by I'm talking about the heart of this book, sort of not the protagonist, but obviously the guy, the son of which the entire thing revolves around, Coach Brice Brown, who is motivator, molder of men, hard ass, disciplinarian, protector, all of the things that you see done well in books and movies and also done totally cliche. And yet I didn't feel like I've ever read anything about a coach quite like him. In a bunch of different ways, he checks all those boxes and yet also checks a bunch I didn't even know really existed, including his great phrase, "No what the fucks," which I just find vastly entertaining. But tell us how your relationship sort of grew and how you got him to trust you, or if he just took it. I assume there was some calculation. Everything he does seems to have some calculation, but how that developed, because he's a fascinating dude.
Yeah, he is. In 2018, I wrote a story in the Washington Post about Karr and Coach Brown, Ronnie Jackson, who was a senior running back at the time. Sort of similar premise, but I started talking to him fairly early on after the story ran about just, what if I would like to expand this into a book? It's a lot more work. I would just want to embed for an entire year, or an entire season at least. And he's just a guy, he's just sort of no bullshit. I mean, like he values honesty, I think, more than almost everything. And the fact that a couple things. I think he thought that the story that I wrote for the Post was very honest and true to life. Second, he's a high school football coach in the South. And so that makes him a little bit of a king. There's people like in his coaching staff who just sort of go along with whatever Brice says. One thing, so Brice, this is important to sort of picturing who Brice is. So he's about 400 pounds. He's this mountain of a human being, big, thick, kind of ratty beard. He takes really terrible care of himself. And a lot of what he does is because he's so busy trying to mentor these young people, and in some cases save lives, or give them purpose. And, he sort of trades his own social life, personal grooming, for them. He's more likely to buy them clothing than he is himself clothing, things like that. But he has these crazy sayings and beliefs that are very true to being a high school football coach. One of which is he's allergic to green, not greens, but the color green. So any food that's the color green, unless it's on a chicken sandwich or a hamburger, he can have a piece of lettuce. It's ludicrous. And I just sort of call bullshit on that. So he and I have a great relationship. And I think it's because like he really craves people to be honest with him and to stand up for themselves and to sort of challenge them on some of these crazy things. I mean, he's a little bit of a social anarchist, a little bit. Like he just tries these, kind of crazy experiments sometime. And I think it's often to see if people just go along with it. He told me once that if he drinks a lot of sodas, like full sugar sodas, like Cokes, he loves Cokes. And he told me one time that if a doctor told him that one more Coke would kill him, he would drink that Coke just to see if the doctor was right. That's just sort of Brice in a nutshell. I mean, it's absurd, but he's just like, that's just sort of how he sees the world. But I think he trusted me because I told a true story. I didn't need to juice it up. It sort of is what it is. And I also kind of give him a little bit of back and forth. Like I don't quite swallow the nonsense that some of the assistant coaches and the kids might.
Yeah, I mean, he's a main, like, beyond being like a main focus of the book and stuff like that. Like I've read a lot of, like, not to brag, I've read a lot of football books, just over the course of my life. Coaches are often at the center of it. I don't think that there's an element of neurosis and melancholy. And like you said, I mean, just the extent to which he sort of neglects himself, that's like almost like a coachly tick at some point. Like you see it with NFL coaches, guys that are paid millions of dollars instead of $77,000, which is what you mentioned at one point his salary is, where it's like Adam Gase making a point of being like, oh, I don't talk to my wife. That's time I could be spending watching tape or whatever. And like, that's depressing on its face. But then in this case, it's just like, it's interesting to see, like, I don't know that this is exactly where that archetype comes from. I think where football coaches is concerned, there's a deep well of national neuroses, where we got the idea that a football coach is supposed to be like, if your dad was George Patton and also like was allowed to yell at you nonstop. But there's something about the way that his personality reflects itself in the program that I found like really sort of fascinating in what you were saying, especially in terms of the way that he sort of seems to like to wind people up or make people confront each other and other things and stuff like that. And I haven't covered football or high school sports at all in the way that you have covered stuff like this. How much of an outlier to you? I mean, was it just that beyond the fact that this guy's a fascinating person, was it that you spent time down there and were sort of like, all right, this is a person who is unlike any other human being I've ever written about? Or was it just that all of it came together? Because the milieu and the team is interesting too.
I think we should throw in there. He's also an offensive guru. He's very much oh
yeah, they're running a spread offense in high school. Like they're doing cool shit too. It's not just like, and
he's got that, he literally doesn't give a shit about the defense.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's all so you have both this, you have the background of violence, you have all this protection, but also a guy who's like, I like video game this thing up. What can we do here? So beyond, it isn't just sort of a kind of cliched Disney, this guy's helping, it's also, this guy is a genius offensive mind who could probably take that farther.
Like so much of a genius that I think he's really bored with football. I mean, like a lot of what we talk about is just like how he's just, not fulfilled, coaching high school ball. It comes really easy to him. And, like I've covered football at every possible level. I was an NFL writer for 5 years. I learned more in this year around the Karr program than I did in 15 years covering college and pro football or high school football. This is embarrassing, but I'm also like kind of stupidly proud of it. So I play a lot of Madden online and I run Karr's offense. At the beginning of this process, I couldn't have told you like what cover 3 is. Like I always like sort of thought as an NFL writer, I should probably know I should be able to recognize cover 3. It's the most basic defensive coverage there is. It's extremely easy now that I know that, or cover 2. So I'm in the top 1% in the world because of just like the things that these coaches taught me. They let me sit in on meetings, film review. This taught me, like, if I had a question about, all right, what's the difference between cover 3 and cover 3 match, or cover 3 sky, or cover 3 hard flat, they would tell me this. And then, what play will beat it. And so just like from being around them, I'll never be a football coach, I don't think. But I play it online, and it's a ridiculous way to sort of turn my brain off. But Brice it comes so easy to him that it's boring, and he has no interest in defense or special teams. He doesn't understand it except how to beat defenses. But all of these things just sort of happen in his mind. If you give him a sequence, all right, it's 3rd and 14, you're on your own 41. Defense is showing, cover 2 with maybe and one of the linebackers is showing blitz. He knows exactly what play that he would call to beat that. And it's not hard for him. And he's kind of annoyed that you asked him, because it's like so obvious that that's what you would call. I believe this, despite how ridiculous it sounds. I think that Brice Brown could call plays at any major university in the country, like in a different life, like he would be an offensive coordinator at LSU or Alabama. He is every bit as talented as, I'm going to blank on the guy's name, who's the LSU offensive coordinator who's now with the Panthers. He sees the game, Joe Brady, he sees the game the exact same way. And every defense, everything he sees can be hacked. And I refer to him as a football hacker. And the two parts of his job are just relentless. It never ends. It's not just that he's trying to win football games and maintain this impossible standard. They had won 3 straight state championships in Louisiana when the book starts. They've been in the state championship 10 out of the last 11 games. It's an impossible standard at a very high level of high school football. But also in 2016, their former quarterback got murdered. And so it's very real that, these kids just get killed a lot of the times. And assistant coaches get guns drawn on them. I mean, one crazy thing when I reported the original Washington Post story, and again, like Brice is a little bit of a sociologist in a way. I come from a very different place, obviously. My experiences are completely different. So one day at practice, there's about 100 players and coaches on the field. Brice asks everyone to raise their hand if you don't know anybody who has been gunned down. Nobody raised their hands. Everybody on the field knows somebody who's been murdered. And that just blows me away. It's just like, I don't know what to make of that. And he wears it. He knows his father, his best friend, and his former quarterback were all murdered, and they're all buried in the same cemetery. It's just not, the way I see the world.
There's an extent to which that sort of not just like permeates, obviously, like, because this is about this milieu and it's about these people, but that sort of the menace of the community in which, especially in which Joe Thomas lives and stuff like that, is really like, it's a difficult thing to write about, I think, even for people that, and maybe especially for people that cover communities like that. But there's like, these are neighborhoods in New Orleans that are not written about widely, I think, maybe even in like the Times-Picayune or anything like that. So that element of it, like the football stuff, I will say, like, beyond, there are some very lucid little illustrations of the cover 3 at the beginning of the chapters. I did learn a little bit about football reading it, just in terms of the writing in that front is very straightforward and clear in a way that most people just tend to leave out. I'm curious about sort of covering the kids and covering the neighborhoods. I mean, you mentioned sort of as an outsider to the culture of the program, you're very clear about that. You're very upfront about it. And I think that, like, you embed closely enough that I don't think that that's really felt in the narrative. But then there's these other places where, you mentioned these characters, these people had never met a white person before, like until Christy Francesco was hired or whatever. There was one of Brice's, that got his last name, right?
Chris DiGiovanni.
DiGiovanna. Wow, that's anti-Italian discrimination on my part.
Chris.
I apologize for the profiling. But in terms of covering like something like Joe Thomas's life, this is pretty far outside the mandate, even of a sports writer who writes ambitious feature stuff like you. How did you approach that, I guess? Like, where do you even begin in terms of like getting into a neighborhood like the Cutoff or something like that?
And you should add in a little bit about his mom. I don't want to say her name wrong. Kiyoki, is that how you say her name?
Kiyoka.
Kiyoka, who had what I would term unorthodox child raising methods. Probably isn't, that sounds a little too soft.
The minimum legal allowable statement of judgment.
It reminded me of, it felt to me like like urban Navy SEAL training. Like basically,
Yeah.
I'm going to break you to survive.
She would like
And
drop her kid off in neighborhoods he wasn't familiar with and be like, you have to get home from here. That's
pay
a
kids to
challenge.
beat him up. But it becomes completely understandable from where she comes from, where she lives, and her, sophistication just and her parental role. It all kind of makes sense on a logical, even if it's hard to take, emotionally or psychologically or however you want to put it, just from a reading standpoint. But anyway, I just wanted to add that to Dave's question. Yeah, what's it like dropping into that family's life and that neighborhood? And
I mean, extremely uncomfortable for me, but that's obviously an understatement. I mean, I went over to Keoka's. Well, there's a couple of spoilers here, but I went over to Joe's house. So when the book begins, she's in prison. Not her first time being in prison. I did wind up meeting Keoka and interviewing her, and he is somebody just from like like to your point, she's right. The way that she raised Joe is completely different from how I would raise my daughter. But I don't raise my daughter on the streets of New Orleans. Keoka she's been on the block, which means selling drugs since she was a teenager. She got disowned by her parents, by various foster families, didn't learn to read until she was an adult. She's sort of been in and out of jail. The way she sees the world, and in fact, her home city, is just in a very like brutal way. Like she's been around so many murders, and it's just like part of her life. This is not shocking, how she lives. It's just part of, the hum of her surroundings. And so she raised Joe, who's her only child, to survive that, to know how to move, to know how to maneuver this New Orleans. And she taught him to scrutinize, everybody. You shouldn't trust anybody, certainly somebody who looks like me. And so, I started with Joe, I started very slow, he's very shy. He's very self-conscious. And again, like he just doesn't trust anybody, particularly outsiders. But because Brice trusted me, Joe had some reason to trust me. So I talked to him, what would amount to off the record, 3, 4, 5 times before I ever, wrote down anything. I just wanted him to understand, where I was coming from. Like, I am here just to hear about your life. And I want to show people, I want to show people what you've survived. I want to show people what you've learned. I mean, one interesting thing is he doesn't think it's unusual. He thinks he's lived every teenager's life ever. Keoka didn't think that his life was unusual. I would disagree, but that's just sort of how they view this complex world. But I just did a lot of listening. I embraced my outsiderness, my extreme whiteness when going into these neighborhoods. Keoka, when I first met her, thought I was a police detective, an undercover police detective. Because she said, you look like the people who locked me up. And I was like, well, I promise I'm not. I'm not a cop. But you have to, it's little things like that you've got to sort of get past. Because a white guy who comes around and starts asking a lot of personal questions about, some activities that are nefarious and extra legal, would, I think, raise some alarm. So I treaded quite carefully. I tried to let them get to know me. I shared details of where I came from, why I'm asking these questions, how I saw the story developing. But it's honestly as simple as, because Brice is this king and because he trusted me, that was at least a notch in my favor for these young people, and in some cases their families, to trust me too.
And there's that part in the book where I think it's Coach Norman is talking about how the kids, as good as the team is, when they play all white teams, they tend to come unglued. And because of a long-standing sort of, inferiority complex, being second-class citizens, you're not smart enough to beat a white team. So Brice takes that, and he goes to school. What is the school? St. Paul's, an all-white school, loses the first time and then beats them 3 times in a row or something like that, and then
Lost
drops
a lot. Lost a lot.
And then just stops because it's like, I beat you twice, lesson learned.
Right.
So clearly he's also thinking through some racial dichotomy stuff. And I wonder if you ever talk to him about that sort of specifically, like how he's trying to use whiteness and to his own benefit and his team's benefit, which I thought that part was really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, this is a coach and a program that, if it's uncomfortable, it can be used to their benefit, and so what Pride Panel is, I mean, like, it is an excruciatingly uncomfortable confrontation where, I mean, these kids, I mean, that's what they are, they're kids, but the coaches are cursing at them, yelling at them. I mean, what they do is they start every Pride Panel by saying, was today's practice more good than bad or more bad than good, and why? And it doesn't matter what the answer is, you're wrong, and like they jump on them. I mean, like they jump down their throat and, defend your answer. And I mean, it gets extremely tense at times, and that's by design. I mean, like it's just like learning how to recognize the blitz. Like, you have to see it coming, because we all deal with adversity in our lives. And if somebody pulls a gun on you or is confronting you, or you're pulled over during a traffic stop, that cannot be the first time you've ever dealt with adversity, because then you're going to overcorrect. Then you're going to say something that might escalate the situation. So what they do is they use this as a conditioning exercise to deal with this in a controlled setting. And that way, when you deal with it in the outside world, it's not the first time. So yeah, one of the things that Brice and the program do is, like, how do you, especially if you're an all black school or predominantly black school, how do you simulate racism if a lot of these kids have never met a white person? So, what Brice did in 2014 is he, for the first time, hired a white coach. And it wasn't just that he hired a white coach. He told that coach to be a real asshole to the players, call them names, get in their face, fight them if that's what it takes. Like, where 7 out of 10 college football coaches is white, and the overwhelming majority of the player force is not white. You cannot have gotten all the way to college football, gotten a scholarship, and then somebody says something to you that's offensive and you blow up. Nobody ever knows what the coach says. They just know that you're no longer on the team. So he again uses that as a conditioning exercise, that the first asshole white person that you meet is gonna take place here at Karr, because that cannot happen on a college practice field after all this. And it's very three-dimensional for me. And I mean, I cannot speculate on why he gave me the access he did, but I do suspect that one of the reasons is a lot of these young people had never met a person of a different race. They, like Kyoka, somebody like me had not often come into their world and asked them these very, very personal questions, probing questions, things that, most people would be uncomfortable answering. I am certain that had to do with his strategy, just knowing him and knowing kind of how he sees how these young people's psychological systems work.
I'm going to editorialize briefly here. I think the book's really, really good. I think it's clear, I guess, that Patrick and I both sort of think that. There's also in it, though, and I think just to follow on your point about what Coach Brown's sort of process is, so much of it, as you said, is in his mind palace, locked away from, people that he does not necessarily feel compelled to explain himself to. This is a strange one, and I wouldn't ask you to ordinarily to put words into his mouth here, but there is, given how much, not just access, but how much stuff you saw and how open these people who, maybe weren't as much signing up for it, players at Pride Panel crying or, fighting, or just in general, doing things that you wouldn't ordinarily do in front of a stranger or in a place where you'd think that other people might find out about it. What do you think Coach Brown was trying to get out of being a part of this book? And to what extent did that weigh in your process in terms of trying to write it?
But I asked him about it, there were times where, as a reporter, my job is to be there and to show you what I've seen. That's stripped down as, the most basic way of explaining what I do for a living. And there were times where, though I was invited in, I'm just like, man, I shouldn't have seen that. I should probably go outside for a little bit, right? Nobody ever asked me to do that. Nobody ever asked me to close my notepad. Nobody ever asked me to, hey, take a breather, go outside and get some fresh air. I think it's when I asked him, why he let me in on some of these things, his answer is always because I have bigger shit going on. I don't care about keeping secrets. We have people who are dying. We have people in homeless situations. They have irregular access to running water, food, electricity. And these are young people who have bigger fish to fry than a reporter in there with a running tape recorder. They certainly have bigger fish to fry than to, gussy up a story for my benefit. I think that it's just because they wanted me to see and to show everyone, this is sort of what it takes. Enough of this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps bullshit that, people who look like me are perfectly content to say, like, all it takes to make it, no matter where you come from, is to work hard enough, study hard enough. You can get to college, you can get a good job. I don't believe that anymore. Like, after meeting Joe Thomas, I just don't believe that. It takes so much more. Joe Thomas making it as far as he's made it is a fucking miracle. I mean, like, it's just like, it takes this sequence of things happening, combined with luck and mentorship that so many kids in this country don't have access to. And I can only speculate that Brice just wanted me to see, this is what it takes. Like, all right, white guy, stop, people who look like you, stop saying that. Like, stop minimizing the journey, how damn hard it is. It takes a series of little miracles to get these kids to college. And to believe not just that they're capable of these amazing things, but they're also worthy of them. So I think that's it. I mean, I can't answer definitively, but
yeah, of course.
I think it's just this is somebody who has just such a lack of patience for bullshit and lies and superficiality. I think he just, wanted somebody to show the realities of one community in the country.
Is there something specific, and I will say the extent, I go to New Orleans on a fairly regular basis, but to do what people of my ilk go to New Orleans to do.
Is that where you got those beads?
Yes, because I failed on the decorations, so this is as far as. I've been to Algiers because I've written a story on Mardi Gras World. I'm going to guess Mardi Gras World is not a prime example of what the life in Algiers is like. And I'm curious if there's just something specific to being on the other side of the rivers. Is there within the New Orleans framework, is the West Bank even more isolated? I'm curious about that as part of, it's not part of the physical city, even though obviously the French Quarter is a mile away or something.
I mean, for me, this is obviously highly personal, but I don't stay on the East Bank anymore. Like, when I go down there, the French Quarter seems fake to me. And I've just spent so much time on the West Bank. That's just now where I feel comfortable. So I usually stay in Algiers Point, which is still fairly white, but it's not far from where this Black working class neighborhood, it kind of comes to life. And I mean, it's where gentrification has pushed a lot of the working class Black residents of New Orleans. For me, it just feels a little bit closer to the real thing. The French Quarter, Mardi Gras World, I've been down there for the Super Bowl and events and things like that. New Orleans is great at showing you the side of itself that it wants you to see. When a lot of people have asked me, what was sort of the origin story of this book? How did I find out about the school? The yada yada version is in 2016, after Will Smith, the former Saints player, got killed in the Lower Garden District. Mm-hmm. And for those of us who don't know what the Lower Garden District is, it's super rich. I mean, it's the richest part of New Orleans. It's where Emerald lives. It's where Sandra Bullock lives. And Will Smith, who's this beloved millionaire who helped the Saints win a Super Bowl, got gunned down because he was an offender bender. I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the long and short of it. They just both reached for guns. One guy got there first. And so I was there. And when I wrote the story for the Washington Post, kind of on how the hell this kind of thing happens, somebody from City Hall called me and they were dismayed by what had happened, but more they were lecturing me on how dare you tell the world, this happens in New Orleans, you know? And I was like, what, man? Like, why is that what you're, you know, concerned about? And I understand like this is like a multi-billion-dollar tourism industry, but they need people like us to go hang out on the French Quarter and not worry that we're going to get shot. And I get it, but it's really disingenuous to me. And I mean, I guess I've just been around the car people too long. I just have no patience for that. I mean, because it's bullshit. I mean, like I'm just going to call it what it is. It's bullshit. New Orleans is scarier to me than the South Side of Chicago or East St. Louis or West Baltimore, because the first 2 Saturdays of August, 10 people got shot on Bourbon Street. Now it's like late at night, like 3 a.m, but you know, they don't get in fist fights down there, man. They reach for a gun. And I love New Orleans. In fact, you know, this is messed up, but I probably love it more now, you know, despite knowing all the sort of truth about it. But it is frightening to me, you know, and I love it. I call it charmingly fucked up. You know, if you know how to move, if you're familiar with it, you know, it makes you earn it. But as soon as you earn it, you know, that's actually kind of when you're in real danger, because you stop paying attention.
I remember going there, whatever the first 6 months after Katrina, they had that sort of makeshift jazz fest. And one of the guys who kind of took us around, he had lost his house. And I remember going in, and his wife had never set foot in there because she was pregnant and their nursery was destroyed. And then he sort of walks in, and that the rising, it's the famous book about the flood, is just sort of sitting there on the floor. And he's like, there's 5 pounds irony for you. But it's something you just driving around, you couldn't believe it.
Right.
Even if you watching it all on TV, and then you kind of track it year to year, and it's like New Orleans is back, and it's like some parts, and but the sort of civic, and I understand a lot of it, and a lot of people's businesses, you know, they rely on tourism, so they have, but the sort of civic story that they kept constantly telling was clearly half the story, and none of that has changed. There's still sort of this relentless drumbeat of, in a way that I guess maybe in New York it just doesn't sell, because the tourism thing it's almost like 2 different worlds, in terms of white people with money live 2 different lives, as opposed to New Orleans, where it's 2 completely stratified things. So to be immersed in that while knowing what's going on at, you know, Cochin, it must be kind of must have been sort of not mess with your head, but it's just, you had to be hyper aware of that, like at all times, or probably now even more.
Yeah. I mean, I'm taking my my wife, my daughter, and my mother all to New Orleans. My daughter and my mom have not ever been, and I'm going to stay in the Lower Garden District. And it's not for me, it's for them. You know, like I don't want to scare them. You know, I like, part of me, my wife probably never let me do this, but man, I want to move down there. I love it. Like, I mean, I really love it.
It is
and
the
you're front, you'd be
coolest
used to
and
the
scariest American city for sure, in my opinion.
It is, and I can only sort of like self-analyze a little bit, like why do I love it more now? And I mean, it probably speaks to me in probably not a very flattering way, but I don't know, like there's a lot of people who like it's sort of like this, you know, organism that gets in your blood, and like the more it sort of attaches itself to you. Like every time I left, even when I'm writing about and learning about the brokenness and the corruptness and the police force that's so messed up, and the politicians that have gone to prison, you know, I leave and I'm like, whoo, that was a lot. Now I can't wait to get back.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, and I really can't explain it. I mean, it's just like this unapologetic, you know, very European. I mean, it's not like that clean. I don't know. I mean, I can't even like explain why I love it, but I love it. I mean, love it. And, you know, like, but that's not what I need to show my wife and my daughter and my mother, you know? And so I'm going to show them the New Orleans that I don't like so much anymore. I think the Lower Garden District is fine. And I would love to have a house there, but that's not where I like to hang out, you know? And so I like that the city has different layers, you know, like you live there. If you're born and raised there, you know this. If you have been there a lot, you know this. And there's sort of this like pride, and maybe even like a little bit of arrogance of like having been to New Orleans a lot and learning that there's way more than Bourbon Street. How many of us like to brag about, well, have you guys ever been to Frenchman Street? You know, like
I was gonna say,
this
like,
secret.
you're not the first person that
Yeah.
I've heard that's like sort of playing that, like, I'm a level 8 New Orleans visitor. Like,
Yes.
I'm like,
I know what
Yeah.
the movie Chef, he pulls up on Frenchman and he's like, "This is where the locals go." And I'm like, I'm pretty sure when Jon Favreau brings the movie crew, we've moved past
I'm
that.
gonna spin you guys around. My battery is dying.
all right.
Yeah, I'll plug in.
My God, even that side is better than where I am right now. That's the part that's not camera ready. That's incredible.
Did anything maybe
Speaking
you
of leveling up, if I had like a roaring fire in the
Yeah,
fireplace,
it's like, oh, hello, I didn't see you there. Like a brandy snifter suddenly in hand.
even if you weren't conscious of it at the time, did and they're very different books, but did writing and reporting the Iverson book, did that help sort of lay any groundwork for heading there, and at least knowing what his life was like? And I know wasn't fly on the wall kind of thing, but obviously he went through hell and back in the same way a lot of these kids did. Did that influence or set your mind when you started this book?
that's a good question. I hadn't thought of it, but I mean, yes, ultimately, because Brice and Iverson are both anti-heroes. I mean, like they're severely flawed people that I respect and sort of admire, I guess. Like they do it in a very different way. And they're the kids, like, I mean, young Iverson, I think came out of these excruciating circumstances that he wasn't supposed to, and was very loyal to the people who made him. And so, I mean, I guess I've wondered, like, what happens if Joe or Fat or Leonard get rich, you know, like, and then what's their responsibility? You know, like one thing that Brice teaches these people is, you know, there's some honor in being a car man. And part of that means coming back and supporting the community. But Brice is different from that. Like for him, a car man is get the hell out of here and never come back. And that's a strange thing to say because, like, I mean, on the surface, it's like, man, he just doesn't care about these kids. Well, no, like he actually cares about them so much that he knows bidding them farewell is the right thing to do. I mean, it's like setting them free. Please never come back here. Tyrann Mathieu once told me, I mean, he's one of New Orleans' favorite sons. I didn't go to Carr, but when he comes back for his like celebrity kickball game, he never tells anybody. Like you never see, hey, I'm going to New Orleans. I land at 10 a.m. tomorrow, because he's scared of somebody killing him. Like this is like somebody who is universally beloved. And if Tyrann Mathieu, the honey badger, can't come back without fear, Joe Thomas and Leonard Kelly and Fat, you know, all these guys, you know, what chance do they have? So, you know, Brice wants them, as painful as part of it would be, to get the hell out, go find life elsewhere, and just please don't. I mean, that's one of the reasons I named it this. Like he wants them to cross the river forever and not come back. I mean, it's very bizarre, and it's the hardest thing. As somebody who grew up poor in South Carolina, not West Bank poor, there is a fucking excruciating choice often to make in this country, and you have to sometimes choose professional success and education versus family. And that's a choice that I can't believe that this nation makes you make sometimes. And in New Orleans, it absolutely does. I mean, almost talking about beer over. Tonka George got killed for one reason. He came home to see his mom. He did everything right, got his college education, did the up by your bootstraps thing, but he graduated, came home, and was home for 7 weeks, and somebody saw him and killed him.
That sort of haunts the entire book. I mean, that not just that death and sort of the trauma, but like there's the sense of like everybody still mourning this, you know, this is 5 years after the fact when you're writing the book, or 4 years after his murder, that like the unreasoning element of it that you sort of talk about, that like that idea of like a force that doesn't have like a human face on it, but just like this thing that pulls people down throughout the book is very like, this isn't a question. I'm just, because I know we're about to do the Q&A thing and run the video, but it is very well evoked without seeming exploitive, I think. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do. Just the idea of like what that is, the thing that sort of like makes these lives so much more dangerous than they need to be.
And it also
seems in
seems
that place is like, it's there without being sort of dramatized in a way that, you know, suggests you're trying to reach for some cinematic grandeur or whatever. Maybe
And
Patrick has a question.
hold on. It seems like New Orleans has that, but also just reading crime across the country. I did JVC in '93 in the Bronx, which is like domestic Peace Corps. And it was very violent, but it was all sort of it was still the crack wars, drug wars, like they were kind of defined. And my sense is through this book, and it seems to be in other cities, but it's much more like neighborhood beef. Like there aren't any rules to it anymore either, which that's even more frightening. That it's just sort of it's always now the wrong place, wrong time, and much less than when it was like, you don't sell drugs here or you cross this guy there, which doesn't make murder better, but at least it seemed to make more sense.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is like there's this invisible boogeyman that like could be anywhere in New Orleans, and like you can predict that boogeyman is over here, and then shots ring out on Bourbon Street. Like there are ways to avoid it, but it's a little more complex than basically if you stay out of the south side of Chicago in certain neighborhoods, or like West Chicago, which is kind of what we like put up in this country as like the epicenter of gun violence here. If you stay away from these neighborhoods, like you're probably okay, like nobody's getting killed for the most part in like the touristy area of Chicago. Nobody's getting shot in Wrigleyville. For the most part. But in New Orleans, that's just not true. And, like it makes sense. I mean, like it is as messed up as it is, it makes sense. There's a generation of people that endured this horrible, horrible trauma with Katrina and never learned how to de-escalate a crisis. Like crisis management or confrontation comfort is just not something that a generation of people dealt with. Like they don't trust the cops, which is true in a lot of cities in this country. It's very territorial. People don't often leave their neighborhood, and they certainly don't trust people who aren't from like right here. And then you've got this horrible trauma that all these people dealt with that included homelessness and extreme poverty. And if only it were so simple as like in LA, and I know this is like a cliche, but if they were just wearing red or blue, you could, all right, well, I'm not going over there. It's just not that simple. Tonka I personally believe that he didn't even know that he had been targeted. I can't like prove that factually. So I didn't write it, but I think the reason that he had a gun in his pocket and never pulled it out, even when somebody walked up to him, is because he had no idea that he had been indoctrinated into the street war that he had kind of been in for years. And so that to me is the scariest thing. And again, when I first started reporting, I asked Chris D. So Karr has since moved into a different campus, a very nice campus, kind of around the corner, but the Karr that I spent so much time at is in a neighborhood. It's very like the neighborhood is okay. It's like kind of like lower middle class, but the school itself is falling apart. I mean, every window was broken. There's sort of trash all over. They knew that they were leaving, and they, were not going to like clean up any more than they had to. And the first time I went there, like I'm very aware of like how I stand out, and I was just like, man, like Chris, fellow white guy, like how long did this take you to get used to and not sort of be nervous, about, with your surroundings here? And he's just like, I don't know how long it took, but I'm not anymore. And I remember being alarmed when I stopped being alarmed. Like it was just like, man, like Brice had me lock the back gate one night, like everybody left, and I don't remember what I was doing, but he just like had me lock the back gate. And I just didn't think anything of it. And I was driving away back to my hotel, and I'm just like, holy shit, man. Like, I'm not afraid of this place anymore. And that was almost a problem because I wasn't looking over my shoulder.
Well, we should say this book also has a ton of joy in it. And no, we will not spoil it, but the football scenes written at the end are really dramatic. And I was kind of riveted, and I put my phone down so I wouldn't look up the highlights. But let's run the clip real quick to cleanse the timeline, as they say. Explain what's happening here. This is the famous Edna Karr football intro, which you described vividly, but somehow is still even better than that.
Oh, I'm glad this is the video. We'll see how this rhymes with my mind's eye version.
So let me set it up real quick before whoever pushes play. So this is called The Rock. And you'll see in a minute, they sort of sway back and forth. I'm a big college football nerd. Everybody thinks they've got the best entrance in blank football. I've never seen an entrance like this. So, yeah, this is called The Rock. It's just like this moment of unity and intimidation, and see if you can see if you can place what song it samples. And then afterward, I'll make the big reveal.
And this is the Superdome, I think.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
God, I love it. I love it. Even now, I love it. God, I mean, I get goosebumps even now. It's hard to place, but so that song, I think it's like so, kind of specific and ridiculous and surprising. But it samples the arrival of the king from Coming to America. The
So it's a David Banner song with a Coming to America gag in it. That became
on everything is the David Banner song, and that song samples the arrival of the king, and this is a marching band version of the David Banner song playing the Coming to America song. But I just absolutely love that entrance. It's like this kind of moment of menace, like we're coming, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. They are Cougars Unchained, and as you can tell, I get pretty excited. Even after all this time. And I really can't wait to go back. I mean, I'm going to take my 4-year-old daughter on the sideline, and, she's going to be right in the middle of the rock. I can't wait.
We only have one question, so.
You should take it,
so my brother sent it too. I didn't even know that.
That's why I was thinking it would be better if maybe you.
Why don't you read it from my brother?
All right. Well, yeah, I don't know if you guys are feuding or anything. First of all, hi, Brian. Big fan of your brother, Patrick. I've been working with kids. This is Brian's question. I've been working with kids where trauma is an ongoing part of much of their lives. I can't count the number of times we hear well-meaning people tell us or the youth that all they need to do is work hard. They all know it's bullshit. This conversation really resonates. The kids who do hang on through sports or academia or art and find a mentor are the ones that have a chance. For most, though, the opportunities just aren't there.
Which isn't exactly a question.
Not a question. I should point that out.
But that's okay.
You're allowed to say that about him because he's your brother. I thought it was a very good non-question.
Would you? Well, I would add one thing to that to make it more of a question. Is there at Karr outside of football and maybe marching band?
He says, I guess I wonder how school plays into all of this, Brian.
Oh, I was going to say outside of marching band and football, yes. Look at the family ESP right here at Karr. Is there opportunities outside of the few that make it in football and perhaps marching band or?
I mean, Karr is a really good school. It used to be a magnet school, which like you had to pass like an academics test to get in. They've lowered the standards somewhat post Katrina. Now it pulls from all over the city, but its batting average for getting like its general student body into college is extremely high, particularly for New Orleans schools, which are not great traditionally. But adults to children and teenagers in particular, like these kids take us literally, so if we say, you're going to be dead or in prison by the time you're blank age, they believe us. Like that doesn't scare them. I better do the right thing. They're just like, well, fuck it then, I should go ahead and make this money and, sell the drugs or whatever. And, I'm not going to be around anyway. So, I think we just have to be a little more careful or thoughtful, at least, about the things we tell young people, particularly vulnerable young people who, like, honestly are coming to us for advice. And, you know, it's one thing that Karr does that I write about this, of course, but, you know, it seems so obvious. The coaches treat, had a bug on me. The coaches,
Terrible.
I know, treat these kids like individuals, and that seems so obvious, but man, I've had bosses who don't do that. You know, I've had, you know, I know tons of people who it's just easy to treat everyone like a generality or an archetype. And, you know, like people learn in different ways, like their path to this point is all different. It's all individual and personal. And but that's also like the thing that like really wears away Brice and people like him. Like, this is not an easy job. There's a reason why so many of us say, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's because it's lazy, you know, and it's just easier to say that so we feel better, but that doesn't help anybody, you know. I don't know. I think it takes a little more effort. And I just think if everybody made it a little more, like put forth a little more effort, you know, instead of just like writing these kids off, oh, like you're a failure, you know, you got to just work harder. That's not for them. That's for us, I think. And so I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit here, but I really like the fact that they treat everyone like an individual, and they don't play the, you know, slogan card so much.
On it. It certainly shines through in the book. You know, the question is always, is it Brice Brown or is it, you know, Karr itself? And can those things be replicated, which is somewhat unanswerable. I have to point to here because I forgot to print it out, but this is an excellent book.
That's what it looks like if you have it in book form.
I also think it is, I say this with utmost respect, but I'm being honest. I think it's as good as Friday Night Lights and in some ways better.
Yeah, it whips. It's really, really good. I told Kent before we started that I haven't finished it yet because my dad keeps stealing it from me at the beach house. He's like 100 pages behind me now. So yeah, young-ish people and their dads both agree. Kicks ass.
And I would say, because we give them the real, as Brice Brown likes to say, next month we are going to Brothers on 3, a true story of family resistance and hope on a reservation in Montana. More high school generational trauma as played out on courts and fields.
Oh, and more Montana. That's really nice.
More.
I read about that last night. Like, that looks good as hell.
Yeah,
like,
this is our first Montana book. Son of a bitch. And then in October, we may do a ticketed thing. I don't know yet, but in October we're gonna have Drew McGarry. You may have heard of him.
Don't know him. He's quite tall, I hear.
He's large and his brain is semi-functional, from what I understand. That's all I've been told.
That's really for him to explain. That's cool. We're gonna do a real one though. We're gonna do it live.
We're gonna do it live. We might even sell tickets. We don't know yet.
Terrific.
This book is fantastic. If you like even if you just want to read really good football writing and pretend that the other stuff isn't happening, it's also an excellent football book. But you wrote the hell out of it. Brice Brown, great subject, and I got a lot out of it. So buy it from Greenlight, buy it from somebody, preferably indie. Take us out.
Patrick, David, Kent, thank you all so much for a fantastic conversation, and thank you to everyone who came out tonight. As Patrick said, you can buy the book through Greenlight. You can either, if you're local to us here in Brooklyn, we're open noon to 7 daily, or you can shop online at greenlightbookstore.com for in-store pickup or shipping anywhere in the US. You can find that link to buy across the river in the chat, and you can also find the link to register for the September 23rd installment of Squawkin Sports with Abe Streep and check out his book, Brothers on 3. Thank you all so much again for a wonderful evening, and have a great rest of your night.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Know what the fucks.
Know what the fucks.